In this video, we will go over how Limble's QuickBooks Online integration works. We'll walk you through the steps for enabling the integration between Limble and a QuickBooks account, and finally, we'll generate an invoice for a task. Many companies have a gap between the work they do in their CMMS and their QuickBooks account. These companies often resort to exporting a spreadsheet from one software, formatting the data, and then uploading it to the other software. This process can take hours of work each month and can be error-prone. You can completely automate this process with this new feature. The data between the two systems will be synced automatically, saving you hours of work and reducing transcription errors. This integration will allow users to generate invoices for their customers based on tasks completed in Limble. This includes labor, parts, and other charges based on percentages or fixed rates. Now I'll throw it over to Ben Harrington where he will provide a step-by-step of the new feature.
So let's get started. This is the front end of the integration, which lives at qb.limblecmms.com. Here, a user can paste in their API keys from Limble to start building their integration. Clicking the Next button will redirect them to QuickBooks Online to authorize the connection to Limble. Then it'll send them back to us, where we'll have access to both parts of the integration, Limble and QuickBooks. So I'll put in my API keys. Now it sends us off to QuickBooks. They would authenticate here, and then it would just have them click an Authorize button, and then it'll send them right back. So after we get back to the integration, we can put in our QuickBooks Online company ID here, which is important for the integration to be able to send requests to QuickBooks. If the user doesn't know where that is, which is understandable, there is a link to where to find that information right here. So now we're asked if we want to customize how the integration handles tags. Our tag customization is super powerful, and it lets us have a lot of control over how we create the QuickBooks invoices and what we do with them. Tag customization is multi-layered, and we'll talk more about what that means in a little bit. But for now, just know that this level of configuration we call global, and it's the broadest level of tag customization. It affects everything else. So we'll hit yes. So in here, all of our tags from Limble are pulled in and shown as a rounded box with a checkbox inside. Keep in mind that these tags belong to the user's account, and they could be anything that the user likes or something that's specific to their use case or their business. It could even be gibberish. The labels totally don't matter to the system at all. If we check one of these boxes, we're enabling configuration of this tag, and then it expands to show us what we can do, and we can't submit until all of our enabled tags are configured fully. So on the left, we have a set of radio buttons for what the type of tag is. Each option has a tooltip describing what it does, but I'll go through them really quick and give an overview of what they do. So the bottom two types, fixed amount and percentage, are very similar to each other in that they add line items to the invoice. And then the top three, invoiceable, bill to parent, and tax exempt, differ to the bottom two in that they don't create line items, but rather they have effects on the entire invoice or the entire invoice generation process. So first up, percentage. When this tag is present on a task that we're generating an invoice for, we'll add a line item to the generated invoice for the specified QuickBooks service, and its amount will be for a percentage of the subtotal that we provide on the right side here. At the bottom, we can specify if the generated line item will be taxable or non-taxable, and that's also the case for fixed amount. Fixed amount is just like the percentage type, but instead of being a percentage of the subtotal, it's just a fixed dollar amount. So tax exempt, if this tag is present, then the entire invoice will be marked as non-taxable. So that means even if one of our other tags here is present and is marked as taxable, that it'll be overridden and it'll come out as non-taxable on the invoice. Now, bill to parent, this one just adds flexibility to which customer that we bill. Describing this one kind of relies on understanding the mapping of assets to customers, and we're going to do that in a couple of steps. So I'll come back to what this one really means in a minute, but for now, just know that it lets you keep a task assigned to a child asset, but the generated invoice will be billed to the customer associated to the parent asset. And that'll make more sense in a little bit. And lastly is the invoiceable tag type. Having a tag of this type configured completely changes how the integration works, and in a way that's pretty powerful. But basically all it does is it tells the integration that it shouldn't generate any invoices unless this tag is set on the task. So a user can complete a task, they can go through and clean it up, they can set the completion note, set some tags, and then finally they can apply their invoiceable tag, and it will create the invoice at that point, rather than creating it and updating it a bunch of times for all the changes and cleanup. So what I'm going to do real quick is just run through and set up these tags in a way that kind of matches what their labels are. First, I'm going to do truck charge for the truck charge service. It's going to be taxable. It's going to be a 7% tag. Dryer events, just going to be an arbitrary dollar amount. It's going to be taxable. Invoiceable will be an invoiceable tag. Tax exempt will be a tax exempt tag. Bill to parent will be a bill to parent tag. And then this is kind of a way that tags might be set up. So whenever the dryer vent tag is applied to a task that we're invoicing for, we'll bill $125 as a line item of dryer vent on the generated invoice. And the same thing for the rest of these. Next, we're going to set up how the integration handles labor categories. There's a little spiel here about if yes, then this, if no, then that. But generally, we would recommend that a user hits yes here and sets up labor categories and makes use of them. But what I'll do is I'll show you the preferred way, I'll describe what's happening there, and then I'll just tell you the difference to the non-preferred way. All right, now we're mapping our labor categories on the left to our QuickBooks Online services on the right. This kind of two-column mapper is used in a couple of places, and it's basically just a nice visual way for us to tell the integration, this Limble thing belongs to that QuickBooks thing. So the integration knows what to do when it sees it. So I'm going to drag general labor from the left to the right, and now this basically says whenever general labor as a category shows up on a task, associate the line item on the invoice with this QuickBooks service. We can put several labor categories under the same service, but each labor category can only belong to one service. So I couldn't somehow split up this general labor into gardening, gardening and labor. Those would have to be separate categories, even if they have the same billable rate and everything's the same except for the name. Something to note here is this tags button in the top right of each of these services. You might have noticed that. And as I mentioned before, tag configuration is multi-layered. So if I click this tags button, it'll bring me to that same tag configuration that we saw before, but I'm actually able to configure what tags mean for each of these services. So I can have different behavior for each tag on each service. Tag configuration at this service level is the most specific in the hierarchy, so it'll override the other levels. So if we previously configured the dryer vent tag, for example, to be a $125 fixed amount upcharge, we can tell the integration, actually when it's this service, general labor, it's $225, and for some reason it is, materials, and it's non-taxable. Global tag configuration is enough to handle most use cases, but this just gives us the flexibility to handle some of the weird one-off stuff that somebody might need in their day-to-day work. I'm going to turn that off. We'll just go back. All right, so let's loop back to what the deal would have been if we had said, no, we don't want to configure labor categories on the previous step. So what we would do here is we would just pick a single QuickBooks service that all labor would be assigned to when it comes out on a line item on an invoice. From there, when an invoice is generated, we would try to determine the price by using the billable rate with the billable time in case the task labor is categorized. But if the task labor is uncategorized, it'll still come out on the invoice, and we would just use the labor's billable time along with the QuickBooks Online Services unit price to determine the amount. Since all labor would belong to one QuickBooks Online service, then all of the labor for a task would come out as a single combined line item. This could work for some use cases, but most people would prefer to have it split up. So all you would do here is just click one of these chips and go next. But we're not going to do that. We're going to go back and we're going to keep the stuff that we set up here. All right, we're getting pretty close. Next, we're going to set up our last association. This time we're telling the integration which QuickBooks customer to invoice for which assets tasks. Just like the labor category to QuickBooks service association just before this, this is many to one. So any Limble asset can only belong to one QuickBooks customer, but many assets can belong to one customer. To touch back on the bill to parent tag type, if we've configured a tag of that type and then we assign a child asset to one customer and a parent asset to another customer, if we complete a task that belongs to the child asset and our bill to parent tag is on that task, then it will bill to the customer associated to the parent asset rather than the customer associated to the child asset. So if we look at Limble, I have a hierarchy here of parent asset and 123 test road, right? And if I put 123 test road there and parent asset here, and then I complete a task on the child asset that has that bill to parent, it'll actually go to Cool Cars and not this 123 test road. So we can see that there's a tags button in the top right of each of these customers boxes. That is another level to the tag hierarchy, and there's only the 3 levels. There's global, there's customer, and there's service. And that lets us specify that tags behave a certain way when it's for this customer. Again, that's a pretty specific use case, so it depends on what the customer needs to do. Most people are going to be able to handle everything they need to do with just the global tags, but in certain circumstances they may say that, well, actually, when it's a dryer vent for this person based on the state that they're in, it's $125 and it's tax exempt, that kind of thing. It just gives us the power to do that. Another thing you might notice is the invoices button in the top right of the customer boxes. This is another hierarchy, but it's only 2 levels. You can configure it per customer or you can configure it globally. I'll show you the global one and we'll loop back to what it means. But it's basically how we handle Limbal invoices from Limbal tasks when they come out on the QuickBooks invoices. This next step is really quick and totally optional. What it does is it pulls in all of our Limbal custom fields. There's a bunch of junk data in here, but for all of our assets, and it lets us say that we'll assign the information from those fields for whatever asset we're billing for to this billing information, so email and then the address lines. So for example, I have address line 1, 2, 3 as my custom fields on these assets. I can tell it to pull those in and use those rather than the default customer information that you can set up in QuickBooks. Our last step is to optionally customize how Limbal invoices are handled. We could click no and be done if we didn't want to deal with Limbal invoices at all, or we can click yes and we'll set it up, and that's what we're going to do. So what happens when we handle Limbal invoices, when we're generating QuickBooks Online invoices, is we pull in all of the invoices in Limbal that are assigned to a task. We combine all of them into a single line item, and then we optionally upcharge by a fixed or a percentage amount. So say that we always consider invoices to be materials that our maintenance crew has to go out and buy for jobs. And we always want to mark up those materials by 15% to our customers. We can do that here. Now what we do is we select a QuickBooks service that our QuickBooks line items representing our total task invoices are going to be assigned to. So we're going to use materials. Then we can add a range. We'll click add. And what we have here is a range from this amount to this amount. And we can say that when a total of invoices is between 0 and 100, then upcharge by this percentage amount. In the bottom left of the range, we can add exemptions. This just lets us pick assets and say that if the asset is 123 test road, then don't include Limbal invoices in this range on the QuickBooks invoice. Some folks won't use this, but again, it's just something that gives us a lot of flexibility for these one-off cases that customers might have. So we're going to save this set of ranges. I'm going to add one that's 100.001 to just, a lot of 9s, and that just represents, from just over this one to a lot of money that we'll never charge, and say that that's 50% if it's in that range. So now that we've finished, the integration gives us this webhook URL that we can take over to Limble and we can plug it in, and then our integration is going to be running. All right, and at this point, I have a few things that we need to keep in mind about how the integration works. So the first thing is that the integration will remember us and everything that we've configured, so we don't have to go through all of the steps again if we want to change something. For example, if you add a QuickBooks customer and you add a Limble asset and you're like, I want to go associate those together in that drag and drop step, we can go back there and it will remember all of the other associations that we've created before. So we only have to create the new one. So we don't have to reset up all of our assets and all of our labor categories and everything every time. It's just the little changes that you need to make. So the next thing is the integration uses OAuth 2 to authenticate with QuickBooks Online. So it effectively impersonates the user that originally set it up in order to perform invoice actions on their behalf. That user needs to be an administrator, and this means that if the user's account is deleted or their permissions are reduced or they stop working at the company, then the integration will stop working if you change their account. Because of that, we recommend setting up a specific admin account that doesn't belong to one person at the company, and it's just kind of an integration admin user so that you never run into that issue. Although the integration impersonates a user, after the integration has been authorized, any user that has the Limble keys, the API keys to plug in at the first step, they can come and edit the integration without having to touch QuickBooks Online, without having to be an admin in QuickBooks Online. It'll just use that original user's QuickBooks information to pull in the data that we need to configure the integration. Another important thing to keep in mind is that the integration doesn't automatically send out the generated invoices. Often they're just little adjustments or attachments or different levels of approval that customers want to go through before they actually send out these invoices. So what we do is we just generate it and we update it, and you can send it out whenever you're ready. Building off of the last point, to accommodate those little customizations and changes that might happen manually on the QuickBooks side of things, if the task is edited after the invoice is created, we do update the QuickBooks invoice, but we won't just replace the entire invoice. We actually only update the things that change. So now for the big payoff, I'm going to click here to copy that webhook URL. I'm going to take it over to Limble, go to my configuration, scroll down, I'm going to plug it in here. And now this is going to start firing all of my task updates to that endpoint. All right. Here in Limble, I have a task that I'm ready to fill out and complete so that I can create an invoice in QuickBooks. So first I've already marked this as resolved. I'm going to throw some tags on here. Let's say truck charge, dryer vent, leave it as taxable. I'll add an invoice, call it $150 thing. So we've got one invoice on here. I'll log some time, go 1 hour of general labor. It all looks good. This is done. I'm going to throw invoiceable on here so that when I complete this, it will kick off the invoice generation process. I'll hit complete. That all looks good to me. There we go. And now over in QuickBooks, I have an invoice that's been generated. And we have our stuff all applied right here. Got our upcharged materials that we configured for our invoices, non-taxable. We have our general labor, 1 hour. We have our truck charge tag as a percentage of the total. We have our dryer vent. And our message on the invoice is the completion notes. And yeah, that's about it. Thanks for following along with me. This process definitely isn't the shortest and simplest, but all of the different knobs and switches give us a lot of flexibility to control how we connect Limble with QuickBooks in order to bill our customers. So thanks for watching.